Wonderlands has been out for a short time now. It's had its ups and downs, but today I wanted to talk about balancing Wonderlands and how it all went downhill when the DLC coiled captors. Okay, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. This is not a video about the DLC. That was a joke, okay, guys? What we're gonna be talking about is remember the day that the DLC did come out, there was also that big patch that came out with it that a lot of people loved because it was mainly full of bug fixes and it also came with a few other things. One of those other things was chaos levels going from chaos 20 to chaos 35. And I think that this was the catalyst to pointing out some of the balancing issues in the game and some of the same issues that have kind of existed in all Borderlands games. And I kind of just like to talk about this stuff and point this stuff out. So in today's video, we're going to be talking about the balancing of Wonderlands now that it's been out for a while and we've had a chance to play the game a lot more. Before we get into it, you know what doesn't have balancing issues? Today's sponsor, Magic Spoon. What better sponsor for a video about balancing than a healthy, balanced breakfast? Magic Spoon is a delicious and healthy cereal that offers childlike nostalgia with no artificial colors or sweeteners. It's got 13 grams of protein, it's gluten-free, grain-free, 0 grams of added sugar, and it's low carb with only 4 grams of net carbs per serving. Magic Spoon has been a pretty good addition to my diet since I turned vegetarian last year, and I've been trying to eat more non-processed foods, and don't worry, it also passes the Midnight Munchies test. So click the link below to get some Magic Spoon cereal today. You can choose from the best-selling cocoa, fruity, frosted peanut butter, cookies and cream, maple waffle, which is actually my favorite, blueberry, and cinnamon. But wait, Magic Spoon also recently added Honey Nut to their permanent collection, so be sure to add Honey Nut to your custom box and try it out. And Magic Spoon is so confident in their product, it's backed with a 100% happiness guarantee, so if you don't like it for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. So click the link below and use code ThickFillet for $5 off, or go to magicspoon.com/thickfillet to save $5 off your order today, and be sure to add the new Honey Nut to your custom box. Magic Spoon also now ships to Canada and the UK. So, with all that out of the way, let's get into today's video. What I wanted to start this video off talking about was the big patch we got last month, along with the DLC release, but mainly we're just going to be talking about the extra 15 Chaos levels, taking us all the way up from Chaos 20 to Chaos 35. We went from having plus 541 percent enemy HP, all the way to enemies having 1067% HP on Chaos 35, as well as enemy damage almost doubling from 80% to 140%. This basically now just makes it twice as hard to kill enemies as it used to be. But really, all this did was make it more obvious that there is balancing problems between gear, between classes. Many less builds work at this chaos level than they did at Chaos 20. And, you know, some of that is to be expected when you increase difficulty. You know, like people say you got to use the best builds and the best gear at the hardest difficulty. However, it's really made it so outliers that exploit some skill or item in the game, like all the double dipping stuff, are the builds that perform well, and the off-meta builds that don't double dip, but still require all the same thought and math and stuff to go into them, just don't shine. It's pretty much, at the end game, feels like Torg Stickies, Pixies, Spells, Spell Shot, and double dipping skills like Blast Gas, Blast Chill, Spore Warden Enchantment, where many people are getting their damage from. Also, I'm just going to say it real quick before we get into the balancing. Another plus 15 chaos levels per character is such an insane grind, and it's unfortunate that Primordial only drops at chaos level 35. I wish it was available at chaos 20 or chaos 25, even on a low percent. Plus, they plan to add more chaos levels in the future. If I had to guess, we're going to at least 50, if not higher, by the end of this game's life cycle, but this video is more about the balancing aspects. So let's go ahead and dive a bit deeper into some of the flaws that, you know, adding all this HP to enemies has kind of pointed out between the characters and items. So first, let's go ahead and talk about the items, and what better place to start out than with the guns. I'm going to keep this section pretty simple by just saying a lot of guns don't feel that great in this game. It's funny because in Borderlands 3, one of the major complaints was that people wanted their non-guns to do more. So like shield effects, action skills, and, you know, they put months into balancing non-guns in Borderlands 3. But in Wonderlands, it's non-guns and weird interactions, and then, you know, the specific guns like Torg Stickies and Pixies that really carry you through the endgame. And the guns that do work, like the Swordsplosion, for example, It makes zero sense as to why they buffed this weapon so much, according to their own philosophy. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying we should nerf the Swordsplosion. In fact, number one, I love shooting the Swordsplosion, and I actually am a fan of Torg Stickies. So the fact that Torg Stickies are strong doesn't really bother me. But number two, I am actually one of the people who think nerfs and buffs and major balancing in general is kind of bad for a PvE game. I think it should happen before launch. But let me just point out what I see wrong with buffing the Swordsplosion the way they did. And let me go ahead and just pull up this hotfix right here where they nerfed the liquid cooling. Now, as many people have pointed out, the liquid cooling was the strongest gun in the game. You know, don't be surprised that they nerfed it. That's what a lot of people said. And it was just outperforming almost every other option. So basically, that's the reason it got nerfed, right? Makes sense, right? Until you realize only a few hotfixes later, now they absolutely buffed the shit out of the Swordsplosion to just replace the liquid cooling. On top of that, with the liquid cooling patch notes, they also nerfed a bunch of random stuff like the Masterwork Handbow, the Catatumbo, the Queen's Quai, the Ruby Spite, and then in the Swordsplosion buff, they buffed all Torg weapons, which Torg Stickies were already some of the best guns in the game. So we have one hotfix removing a gun like a COV pistol that's a different way to play the game than a Torg Sticky. It's a different gun, you know, it's a different feeling. And then they promoted more of the same Torg Stickies, and it just makes no sense. So I kind of just wanted to point this out with some of the gun balancing. And I think this is because of the large HP of chaos scaling. Now, this is something I've already spent so much time in criticizing Borderlands games for not understanding the balance of their own game and buffing and nerfing stuff as content for a reason to get players to log in every week or something like that. But really, it's just stuff like this that I think upsets the players. Why nerf the liquid cooling in the first place if you're just going to start making other guns super powerful for no reason? Now that the Swordsplosion got a super buffed, you know, this Thursday when the next hotfix comes out, what other gun are they going to buff up, you know, to make us happy because they buffed the Swordsplosion? So now we go on a chain where, you know, we buff a bunch of guns when instead maybe we can just attack the root of the issue, which is the health scaling. And then we could even nerf some of the overperforming stuff to be in line with the new game. Now, hold on, friends. Friends, I love you watching this video. Don't get scared by the word nerf. Keep in mind, I'm using it in the context that we lower the health scaling. So let's say we lower the Chaos 35 health scaling by 20%. This is just a random number I made up. Well, only nerf the overperforming stuff by 20%. It'll feel the same, you know what I mean? And the main issue with all this enemy and health scaling is it really only encourages the exploitable mechanics, such as double dipping with Blast Gas, Blast Chill, Barrage Enchantment, Double Knot, the class Spell Shot just existing in the way it does, Torg Stickies, Pixies, you know, balance things a little bit more equally, and that way we can promote diversity rather than making many changes to the game week to week, buffing or nerfing, and, you know, kind of souring players' experiences. Now, I do want to bring up real quick that I'm pointing out this broken stuff in comparison to stuff at endgame that doesn't do nearly as much damage, like Clawbringer, like the Dire Sacrifice action skill, like a lot of guns in the game. You know, there is a lot of stuff where it takes a lot of guns and gear and math and just as much, you know, to figure out as this double dipping stuff does, but they just don't work as well. So, you know, it feels a little bit bad in that aspect where I'm putting equal time into both builds, but it's not that I'm not getting the same result, but it's just such a large spectrum. And let's go ahead and get into more details about that. But first, I want to talk about the other items. You know, we talked about the guns and stuff not being good. Let's talk about some of the other items where I think it is very annoying for players to not only loot, but I also think it's a little bit rough for balancing. Now, I randomly saw this video by Sorrow where he talks about how we should be able to re-roll armor in Wonderlands. But as funny as it sounds, you know, I actually disagree with him a little bit. In my opinion, some RNG, you know, I totally understand from a developer's perspective. Like, class mods in every Borderlands game have always been a pain to farm. You know, they've always been the most fine-tuned pieces of gear you have to find. In my opinion, in Wonderlands, it's the rings, it's the amulets, that really bother me. Rings and amulets and Wonderlands are a huge source of damage for endgame, and I think it's a little bit crazier than most people realize. The first thing I'm going to mention is there's actually more RNG for these items than in previous games. In Borderlands 3, for example, only the guns leveled up with Mayhem, and it's nice, we only have a few levels of items in Chaotic, Volatile, Primordial, and they're going to be adding Ascended, but we never actually had to worry about this for gear like artifacts. But in Wonderlands, now you probably want to be looking out for volatile rings and amulets, something we didn't really have to deal with in previous games. And the level of stats like you have to hunt for and the RNG involved. Let me just go ahead and just pull up some pictures from a random viewer who sent me these pictures wondering why his build was doing so much damage. Now, he was running a spell shot build and he was using double knot and he was just shooting his spells at the test dummy and giving me crazy damage numbers, 10 million, 12 million, stuff like that. And I looked at his gear and I was like, dude, take off just your rings. Keep your amulet on, keep your armor on, just take off the rings, okay? And tell me how the damage feels. And he basically agreed that it did make a huge difference. Now, when we look at this ring, for example, it has 22% spell damage on it, 20% spell crit damage on it. And keep in mind, you can actually double or even triple roll these secondary stats. Somebody could have a ring with up to 60% spell critical hit damage, and that's before counting that it's a mood ring. Now, mood rings were nerfed, so this picture is a little bit outdated. I think it only gives a 33% bonus, but essentially, there's a chance to get 0% spell crit damage or like 100% spell crit damage based on this ring alone. And given that spell crit damage is a pretty unique modifier, like the spell shot tree doesn't even have spell crit damage on it. You can pretty much just get regular crit damage from other classes, or you can get spell crit damage from rings, and then count this for everything out there that is possible to roll. There's assault rifle crit, SMG crit, pistol crit. This stuff is very important. Getting it on the right ring, the right, primordial, volatile, stuff like that, and then also matching it to the top, The top of his is spell damage. What if it was gun damage on top? That doesn't help his build at all. And the amount of RNG and the amount of power that these rings hold, I feel like, and I've always felt like, that items like this are supposed to be the cherry on top. They're not supposed to add so much damage that it really, just pushes the build too much over the edge. I would much rather it that these stats were put back into the actual character's skill trees. So, lower the ability to get 100% spell crit damage on a single ring, let alone 2 rings. And I mean, rings are brand new with Wonderlands in general. And personally, I am not a fan of their addition to the game. And yeah, just move around some of that damage and stick to the original formula of just class mods and artifacts. Now, with all that stuff about guns and gear out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about the differences between some of the characters. And don't worry, I'm not only going to complain about Clawbringer in this part of this video, we'll complain about some of the other classes falling off a bit of endgame too, at least some aspects of them. So yeah, now to just get this part out of the way, I'm going to put all these numbers on the screen and I'm going to read them out to you because the context is important, but let's get through it. Clawbringer, we've got a 20% fire bonus to guns, 30% shock bonus to melee, 25% elemental bonus to everything. You can get 10% gun damage in this tree. You can get 21% crit damage in the Clawbringer tree. Now, also, Clawbringer has a bunch of useless ability damage things. They just don't double dip like other effects in the game. This basically gives Clawbringer a 1.66375 multiplier, and then they also have that 20% fire to guns, which I didn't add in there, or the 30% shock melee, because it depends what you're using. Roughly, this will boost you up to at least 1.9 if we apply 20% more to that. And let's go ahead and move on. Next, we've got Spore Warden, 20% gun damage, 50% bonus crit chance, which isn't bonus damage, but I just wanted to mention it because if you crit more often, that is more damage. Plus 54% debuff in that beautiful Wrath of Nature skill, 25% to Headhunter. Then we've got the double dipping Play the Angles, the double dipping Barrage enchantment. Basically, this gives Spore Warden a 2.31 damage multiplier to guns, not counting Play the Angles, not counting the Barrage enchantment, so this can go even higher. Next, we've got Graveborn, which has Faithful Thralls, and the other skill with 25% damage depending on how low your health is. This gives this class like a range of all damage, which you can get Faithful Thrall. You can get a lot of damage out of Faithful Thrall. So I was kind of fair with this range. I feel 63% to 90% all damage, 20% dark magic damage, 20% dark magic to spells, 60% spell damage in the skill tree, and then Graveborn also has Blast Gasp, which is the most insane spell double dipping ability in the game. This basically gives Graveborn a 3.648 multiplier to spells, plus access to Blast Gasp. Next, we've got Berserker, 10% bonus frost damage from Enrage, 20% frost damage, 20% melee damage, 30% all damage, 30% icebreaker, 25% area damage, Blast Chill, which is the strongest melee double dipper in the game, and I actually believe Dreadwind is the strongest action skill in the game, although the Stabomancer's Blade is also probably close to on par with this anyway, so maybe it's not worth mentioning. But Berserker has a 2.535 multiplier, plus a global 10% frost bonus, which is not counting in here, plus Blast Chill, and then Dreadwind, but we could take Dreadwind off, honestly. Anyways, moving on, next, Stabomancer. Stabomancer's got a 6 to 18% debuff, depending on how many status effects you can get on your enemies, 35% all damage between Swift Death and 1,000 Cuts, up to 75% melee damage in the skill tree, 39% spell damage, 15% crit, 15% gun. Then they've got Executioner's Blade, which does 150% of your melee weapon, like 20% of crits, so 1 out of 5 crits get an insane melee bonus. And then they've also got Contagion, which is insane. I actually think Stabomancer is either the most insane skill tree in the game, or it's second after Spellshot. This gives Stabomancer a whopping 3.04 multiplier for melee, 2.41 for spells, and 1.999 for guns, plus Executioner's Blade damage, plus the random chance to just kill something with Contagion. Then, moving on to Spellshot. Take a look at this first bonus in the Spellshot tree, which is a bare minimum of 110% spell damage if you simply spec into this tree with no gear. So this is not counting a bonus high thread count armor, this is not counting Spellshot power, and I want to point out that 110% spell damage is a 2.1 multiplier. And looking back at the Clawbringer tree, that's a 1.9 multiplier. So the minimum amount of Spellshot damage that the Spellshot can get literally dwarfs Clawbringer. It's more damage than Clawbringer's class can get. Now let's talk about Spellshot's other bonuses. 49% magic bullets, which again is the minimum. This goes up if you have more spell power. They get a minimum of 32% gun damage, which goes up if they can get more spell stacks with a high thread count armor. 10% bonus element to guns, and then double knot, which is 20% of spell crits, and it double dips everything. So not only does Spellshot's spell damage bonus alone dwarf the Clawbringer class, it's got a load more of other things, and it's got an insane double dipping skill in double knot. Now, let's go ahead and talk about the differences and talk about why these this class diversity with the outliers to certain classes, like, for example, I'm going to talk about how I feel Spore Warden gun builds have fallen off in Chaos 35, which I already talked about in the first part of the video, because gun builds in general feel like they fell off, right? So if Spore Warden is like a gun class, that class feels like it fell off compared to some of the others. And just the fact that Spellshot has access to so much spell damage needs to come down. Why is that? And that's because items like Warped Paradigm, items like the Spell Blade, we could get other DLC items that mix spell damage, ability damage, melee damage, stuff like that. I also wish ability damage was a little bit more represented in these skill trees. Like the Clawbringer could definitely use some ability damage in his skill tree, given that he has a bunch of ability skills. Just saying. And it's just like what I said, if we nerf some of the overperforming stuff, well, we're gonna bring the health of enemies down as well. Because the fact that enemies are so much tankier now, you can really see the difference in the outlier builds. There's another build in the game, Dire Sacrifice, I would like to talk about. Graveborn and their action skill Dire Sacrifice. Now, Dire Sacrifice is unfortunately, in my opinion, the most unscalable action skill when it comes to endgame. Not only is it insanely gear reliant to get it to do anything, like you need almost perfect gear if you want to use this build, a Dire Sacrifice build in Chaos 35. It only works with one of the classes when it comes to multiclassing, and that is Berserker. And that's because in the Berserker tree, we have this skill right here, Unarmored Defense. This puts your shield into your health, and this bonus gives you more health than any health bonus in the game, including Ascension, which is in the Graveborn skill tree, which is a 60% bonus health if you stack this up properly. And you can get a class mod with more Ascension on it. But the strongest skill for the Dire Sacrifice builds is in a different skill tree. That makes it really bad for multiclassing. Now, the second best class to use with Dire Sacrifice is Stabomancer, and that's because Stabomancer has some cool skills in their tree with status effect damage and contagion, and the status effect debuff damage as well, with the idea that, if there's a huge group of enemies, maybe I apply one dot to each of them, and then contagion makes all those dots spread around, and we can actually kill a bunch of things. Now, the issue with this is when you're not using the Berserker skill tree, your health total comes down a lot. And Dire Sacrifice, you're sacrificing health to do damage. So the initial dot that you're putting on enemies is so low that even with a 6 out of 3 contagion armor, you're not doing super consistent damage. Like, you can definitely get it to work on Chaos 35, don't get me wrong, but it's a pain it requires very, very perfect gear when it comes to, compare like a Dreadwind with Blast Chill. All you need is some spell damage and a Warp Paradigm and it works. But like the Dire Sacrifice build, you need like perfect stats on your gear as well to get the most damage out of it. And you're just using Contagion, which is a random chance that, sometimes you Dire Sacrifice with Contagion and the whole entire room blows up instantly because of some crazy dot that triggered. But it's not reliable. It's not consistent. And the point I'm trying to make here is it does suck a little bit in this game that there's not a viable build for every class combination. Is that like a difficult ask? Maybe it's a little bit difficult, but Borderlands games used to have 3 skill trees per character with 4 characters total. That's 12 skill trees. With half the amount of skill trees, I don't think it's much of an ask, to ask for every single build combination be tested at endgame. And what I mean by every single build combination, I mean every class combination. So if I'm running Graveborn Berserker, I think, there should be a way to do Graveborn Spell Shot. And there is, but not for the Dire Sacrifice action skill. Whereas if I'm running Berserker with Dreadwind, there's lots of options with every skill tree, besides maybe Clawbringer. And yeah, just buff Clawbringer in general. But, that's my whole point. And one idea I have to solve this is why don't we add some skills, if X, then Y? So Contagion, for example. Contagion, obviously, is going to be very good with fast-firing weapons that apply a lot of dots, because a lot of dots with Contagion give you that crazy chance to get that crazy dot. So what if, Contagion, for example, if Dire Sacrifice triggers Contagion, give us 10 more dots or up the percentage chance or something like that. You know what I mean? Obviously, Contagion can technically scale to infinite, so there would be different balancing that has to happen with this. But maybe just in general, like Unarmored Defense and Berserker tree makes a lot more sense in the Dire Sacrifice tree. Just give it a possibility. Like, it feels like Dire Sacrifice just does not work at Chaos 35 anymore, which is disappointing to me because this was one of the skills in the game. When I first started playing, I started on Spore Warden, but I switched to Graveborn quickly, and I wanted to make Dire Sacrifice work, and at Chaos 20, I honestly kind of got it to work, but it was still really bad for bossing. And at Chaos 35, it really feels like it doesn't work anymore, and that's even with perfect gear. So, like I said, I just wish more stuff was looked at rather than just buffing Torg Stickies again. And yeah, that goes ahead and covers everything I wanted to talk about with Wonderlands balancing. I will say, at launch, this game felt better than most other Borderlands games at launch when it came to balancing. It was really the update to Chaos 35 that made it feel a bit worse in my opinion, but I feel like the balancing really isn't too far off from being in a good spot. With that being said, leave all your thoughts in the comment section down below, like this video, subscribe to the channel. I'll see you guys in the next one. I'm out.